let you take it away and have the discussion.
Okay, well, hopefully the slides are going to advance, and they're not advancing. Let's see. There we go. As Grayson said, we want to keep this as informal as we can, because what we're really setting out to do today is to sort of share with you or open up the process to you, what we're doing, where we're going, where we are in the process, and so on and so forth, so that you can stay involved as we develop the state system plan. This plan will serve as a blueprint for Oklahoma's airports over the next 20 years or so. The last time you did a state system plan was 1999. So it's been a while, and it may be a while until you do one again. And so it's really important that we get this one right, and that the recommendations are valid, they're solid, and they point you in the right direction. Aviation is serving as the lead consultant for this. I'm serving as the project manager. Nick Young with Aeronautics is the internal manager for OAC on this job. He's on the phone, and he's been helping us tremendously in terms of daily questions that we have and so on and so forth to keep the process moving. We have two sub-consultants, Lochner, who many of you are familiar with offices in Oklahoma. They're helping us on some of the inventory efforts that we'll talk about, and then Mar Arnold Planning, a DBE firm, and they're primarily helping in the area of investigating and interviewing municipalities throughout the state that are in proximity to airports to see if they've implemented appropriate height zoning. Zach Hazard with Aviation, who's on the phone, is serving as our lead analyst. So some of you may have talked to Zach or Greg Sanders or some of the other people on our staff who have been helping on the inventory effort. So what is an aviation system plan? When you look at the plan when it's finished, it's sort of like a giant master plan for all 108 airports in the state, but at a much higher level. It's important for Oklahoma to do a state airport system plan because it provides information to FAA for their federal airport system. There's a document called the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems. That's the NPIAS abbreviation there. And information that comes from this state plan will go into that NPIAS document that FAA maintains. And it also should inform individual master plans that are going to be done, or ALP updates. What does the state system plan say about your airport? Because ideally, the two should be in lockstep. Your individual plan should be supporting what the state plan says about your airport. When FAA looks at an airport system plan, they have two primary objectives. One is to make sure that the state airport system is balanced, and another is to make sure that it's viable. What we're running into state by state, and we help many states with these kinds of planning studies, is that it's becoming increasingly difficult for states to have systems that are economically sustainable. General aviation, since the systems were put in place back in the 70s, has contracted. And in some instances, there's just not enough demand at some airports to make them economically sustainable in the future. And this is a huge challenge that a lot of states are facing, and one that we're tackling as part of this plan. As I said, your last plan was prepared in 1999. So since that time, a lot of things have changed in aviation, and FAA's guidance on airport system planning has also changed. They released an advisory circular on the interim that was completely overhauled on airport system plan, and we're following that advisory circular as this plan is being prepared. What this plan will do in the end is to help aeronautics ensure that when they're making an investment, that investment is going toward an airport and a project that's most successful to the future success of the system. They want to be able to show and be accountable that their investment is really making a difference. So that's one thing that this plan helps them to do, is to identify the projects that are most essential and then help them be accountable for the investment that they are making. The task for the system plan, as I said, it's not terribly unlike a giant master plan. We identify existing system conditions through a very extensive inventory, which we'll talk a little bit about. One thing that's a little bit different this time around that aeronautics is doing, or the OAC is doing, is preparing a searchable GIS database. So all of the data that we're gathering in the system plan will go into this database, which will be accessible to the airports, to the FAA, to consultants who want to look for various features and factors about the system. It's going to be a system that you can put in place and say, you know, show me all the airports in the state that have a 5,000-foot runway, jet fuel, AWAS, and precision approach. So it's going to actually talk to itself and help you relate different characteristics of the system. So we think it'll be a really useful tool for a lot of people. And the intent then is going forward that database will be expanded, it'll be updated and kept current. We've done a pretty high level look at anticipated demand that we'll talk about for the future. This is again, a top-down kind of analysis. It doesn't replace an airport's individual forecast, but it helps to show system-wide what kind of demand we might be looking at in the future. Right now, we're engaged in looking at airport rules or classifications, and also analyzing and looking at the adequacies and the deficiencies of the existing system, and also looking at whether or not there are areas of the state where we have redundancies in terms of airports or certain kinds of facilities that may be duplicating one another. As I said, our goal is to identify projects that are really needed to raise the bar in terms of system performance. There's an awful lot of money that's needed just on an annual basis to maintain the infrastructure and the system that you have in place. So we want to make sure that if you're investing in new projects, that those projects are going to make a difference in terms of how Oklahoma's airport system performs in the future. And then also, again, allow OAC to have confidence that they're making good investment decisions. This webinar is one opportunity that we have available to make the process open to the airports, to the public, and other aviation stakeholders. We'll probably have at least 3, if not 4 other webinars as we go through the process. So there'll be an opportunity to stay tuned and find out where we are and what's going on with the system plan. So where are we now? Back late winter, we did start working on the inventory, and that has continued through the spring. There's at the very first orange website there, or online survey site, excuse me, is where you can actually access the inventory form for the system plan. We still have a handful of airports that have not provided a completed inventory form. So if you would happen to be one of those, we would greatly appreciate it. Excuse me, if you could take the time and fill out one of those surveys. As I mentioned, Lochner is helping us in the inventory efforts. They've been out visiting some of the airports. One of the things that they're investigating is whether or not airports have control over their RPZs on each runway, and or if you have multiple runways over all RPZs. So some of you will be getting a visit from Lochner, and if you haven't gotten a visit, you've been contacted. So it's really important that you respond to their survey also and let them know whether or not you control the property in your various RPZs. 30 of the system airports are also being more heavily investigated to identify properties that might be open for development. For those of you that attended the airports conference a few weeks ago, I'm sorry, I forget his name again, but a gentleman that represents Oklahoma Department of Commerce was on. And he was saying how important it is for them to understand, what the assets are of the airports around the state, so that when they have inquiries about what facilities are available, what properties are open, so on and so forth, they can respond accordingly and help developers that are looking for an airport site in the state. So we're gathering information on some of those that we'll be able to share when the study's over. We also have, and we've had it up now for several months, another stakeholder survey, and that's the second orange address that you see there. This particular survey is really sort of open-ended. It gives anybody who uses the airports, whether they're a pilot, the airport themselves, you know, an airport board member, whoever might be interested in participating, an opportunity to tell us where you see things in the system that need to be addressed. Where are the deficiencies? You all use the airports daily. Many of you use them, you know, different airports around the state. So you can be a really good resource for us to let us know how the system is performing. As you'll learn as we go through the process, we're going to be evaluating the system, but that firsthand experience that you can provide us with in terms of your knowledge really helps us to make sure that we're addressing all the needs the system might have. Oh, and where did that happen? I went the wrong way. There we go. Okay, so the existing airport system, as most of you know that are familiar with it, you have 108 system airports. 4 of those airports are commercial. The remainder are general aviation. And they range from very, very small general aviation airports that have no based aircraft to some of the busiest general aviation airports in the country in terms of their activity and volumes of aircraft that they serve. So those general aviation airports run the whole gamut. And we're going to be looking at all the airports as we go through the process to determine whether or not they're equipped to really fulfill their role that they're designated with in the state airport system. One of the things that's helping us and guiding us as we go through the process is an airport reference code. For those of you that are familiar with airport planning, FAA assigns to each airport an airport reference code, and that airport reference code has a number and then a Roman numeral, and that Roman numeral and number are based on what we call the critical aircraft. So the bigger the letter, the higher the number, the bigger aircraft that your airport is designed to serve. And these pictures here just give you a brief you know, kind of overview of what kind of planes we might expect to see at an A1 airport, which is the smallest of the planes, up through, let's just say, a C2 airport, which is capable of accommodating a variety of commercial aircraft. So this is an important factor and one that we're using to help guide us. Some of the findings that we have so far from the inventory that we're just going to summarize, kind of some fun facts. For all the airports in the state, 20% of all the 108 have either a category C or D ARC. So that means they're designed to handle pretty much the largest aircraft that are operating in the US. 68% of the airports have a category B ARC, and that means that they're pretty much equipped to handle most large twin engine aircraft and smaller business jets. And then the remaining 12% are ARC A airports, which mean that they primarily are equipped to handle smaller single engine planes. When we look at the runway lengths, 15% of all airports have a runway that's 6,000 feet long or longer. Another 25% have a runway that's 5,000 feet long or longer, but less than 6,000. And then another 20% have a runway that's at least 4,000 feet long. So those are the runway lengths that we look at as being, you know, kind of signifying a business ready airport. And as we go through the analysis, these runway lengths are important to helping us to determine how well the system is really serving economic development opportunities and businesses throughout the state. When we look at approach types, 49, almost 50% of all the airports have what we classify as a precision-like approach. So this could be either an LPV or an ILS. When you combine those airports with the precision-like approach with any airport that has a published approach, then 64% of all the airports are equipped with some kind of a published approach. The remaining 36% have only a visual approach. 23% of all the airports have some sort of an approach lighting system. That would be an ODILS, MALS or a MALS-R. And 65% of all of the airports have either PAPIs or VASIs on at least one runway end. So So these are important things for us to know as we go about figuring out how well the current system is performing. Another thing we looked at and gathered data on was fuel. 46% of all the airports report that they have Jet A fuel available for their customers. 69% then, almost 70% of all the airports have both either 100 low lead or Jet A, and 33% of all the airports report no fuel at all. And that's something that we're going to be looking at as we go into the process, because having no fuel could limit an airport in terms of its viability, in terms of its ability to fulfill its role in the system. And so that's something that we need to examine. 51% of the airports report that they have some kind of FBO services available, whether those are provided through a third-party operator or in some instances through the sponsor that is responsible for the airport. And 62% of the airports indicate that they have a public terminal building. So those are just some of the things that we've found so far about the system. Another thing that we're looking at is the federal role, or the NPIAS role. As I said, that's the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems for the Oklahoma airports. And we look at this because it helps us to understand, from the federal perspective, what kind of role the airport is playing. And in some instances, that influences what we say about the state role for the airport. And in others, it's just another, piece of data that we look at. Back to that map. It's not unusual for the federal role and the state role for an airport to not match. We find this very often because airports play oftentimes. Uh-oh, am I muted?
You were for a second.
Okay, I don't know how that happened. Airports play a much different role at the state level than they do at the federal level. When FAA assigns roles and they have airports, of course, commercial is pretty obvious. You have to have scheduled commercial airline service, but their other roles are national, regional, local, and basic, and then unclassified. And essentially, when FAA slots airports into those roles in the NPIAS, they look at activity. That's the main indicator that they have, because that's the only piece of data that they have that's consistent for all the 4,000 and some odd airports that we have, public airports that are included in the NPIAS. So when we look at the roles on a state level, as we'll talk about in the next meeting that we have, we look at a whole lot of other factors than FAA does. So we find that it's not unusual, and it's actually pretty common for state roles and federal roles to not match, but something that we do consider and do look at. Currently, for the federal roles or the NPIAS roles, 6% of all the Oklahoma airports are classified as either a commercial or a national airport, signifying their significance in the system. Another 10% are in the regional category. 31% are classified as local airports. 24% are classified as basic airports. Currently, 20% of the airports that are included in the NPIAS, or the federal airport system in Oklahoma, fall into the unclassified category, which while it's not a deal breaker, it's not necessarily a great thing either. And what this signifies is that those airports have dropped below a threshold level of 10 based aircraft. They no longer have that level of activity. And that's sort of the entry level for being a NPIAS airport. You have to have at least 10 based aircraft. So what that means is that the federal funding for these airports, could be jeopardized down the road. It certainly presents another challenge to the state, because it puts a bigger burden on them to help these airports make sure that, if it's in the best interest of the state system, that they're adequately maintained and expanded as necessary. There are 8 airports in the system, or excuse me, there are actually 9, which is 8%, 9 airports in the state system that are not included in the federal system. We refer to those as non-NPIAS airports. And one of the things that we're doing, that we're working on right now, and we'll talk about probably in the next webinar, is we're looking at those non-NPIAS airports because some of them are actually quite active. And looking at those to see if there's any opportunity or if it makes sense to discuss with FAA getting any more of those airports included in the federal airport system. Yeah, it went the wrong way. As I said, we're doing a lot of heavy lifting in terms of inventory for this system plan, way more than we normally do for many of the system plans that we do. And that top bullet there, these are things that Lochner's helping us with. As I said, we mentioned that they're looking at whether or not the airports around the state control their RPZs. They're also looking at, on the primary runway, whether the airport meets its criteria for runway safety areas. That's the RSA. For any airport that has any type of a parallel taxiway, they're looking to make sure that the separation between the runway and the taxiway meets the airport reference code for that particular airport. So this is some pretty heavy lifting. Sometimes we just do this within the context of a master plan, but for this one, we're trying to, we have a performance measure about safety, and we want to make sure that the airports are complying with those things that make operations safe at their facility. I mentioned before that Mara Arnold, one of our sub-consultants, has been doing research on municipalities that surround each of the airports to see if they have appropriate height zoning in place, and we'll be reporting on that. Another task that Lochner is working on is an inventory of runway and taxiway lighting for OAC so that they can know what's out there currently at the airports. As part of the inventory effort and some of the follow-up that Lochner is doing, we've done pretty extensive inventories on hangar facilities, excuse me, and terminal buildings. And for those of you that hung with us and provided all that data that we asked for on the hangars, we really do appreciate that. We know that was a heavy lift. That's one of the kinds of things that Commerce likes to know about, because oftentimes they have people coming in wanting to know what kind of hangar facilities are available at the airports. So it helps them to know, from an economic development standpoint, is your airport equipped to handle some of the people that are looking for development sites on the Oklahoma airports. And then also that next one, that property open for development. This is another thing that we're looking at, so that there'll be a ready repository of these things, so that when people come to Commerce or they come to OAC looking for development opportunities, that data will be there for them to look at. It'll be in that GIS database and hopefully can be expanded and updated as time goes on. We are doing some work on UAS, UAV activity, just to make sure that we don't ignore that, and talk about how it may or may not impact the airports in the near term as we look toward the future. As I said, we did a very high level projection or outlook for general aviation demand. Right now, there are about 2,700 based aircraft in the state. We see this growing to over 3,330 by the end of the forecast period. And we see general aviation operations increasing from about 1.3 million to about 1.6 million. These forecasts are very conservative. They're based primarily on FAA growth rates that FAA has for the national fleet of general aviation aircraft and hours flown. So they are pretty conservative. And when you see the forecast for your airport, you'll see that they are on the conservative side for the most part. We also looked just briefly at commercial enplanements. I don't know how to move. I've got the black box of people who, there we go. Commercial service enplanements, again, for the 4 commercial airports. Currently, or in 2019, which was the year that we selected to forecast from. Obviously, 2020 was such a horrific year for everybody in aviation because everybody was gutted by COVID. So we decided it made a lot more sense to use 2019, which was an unaffected year, as our base to forecast from. So in 2019, there are almost 3.8 million enplanements at all 4 airports, and we're expecting by 2040, once the economy recovers and travel again becomes what it was, that by 2040, the airport should see annual enplanements of about 5.4 million. One of the tasks that we're working on now, and the next time we talk, we'll talk about the results of this task, but it's important as part of the system planning process that we have a role, a state role to assign to each airport. And what this does is it helps us to understand then, if you have a role, do you have the facilities and services in place to really fulfill that role? Roles were assigned to the airports back in the 1999 plan, but some of the factors that were used to assign roles at that time no longer apply. I don't know we had basic and general utility airports and transport airports and terminology that's gone from aviation now. Things have changed a lot in that time frame. So at the urging of FAA, they thought it was appropriate that we should sort of start with a clean slate, look at a lot of different factors and go back and reassess the role that all of the airports are assigned to and make sure that those roles are still applicable and that they make sense. So we're looking at various categories, demand, facilities, services, socioeconomic and demographic characteristics of the area that the airport is located in, and other factors such as the NPIAS role that we just talked about, if that's applicable, whether the airport is considered by NBAA to be business ready. And when we get to that part of the presentation with you, we'll go through all those factors that NBAA looks at. We're using the economic impact number that was generated in the other study that Grayson referenced. And then also, what's the general level of community support? Because that's an important factor. As federal budgets shrink and state budgets shrink, and community budgets are being pulled in a million different directions, it's important to know what airports have the most support from their local community. So we're in the process now of going through that role assignment process, and we'll probably have another webinar in late May or the first part of June. And when we have that, we'll be able to discuss this airport role assignment with you and talk about roles that each airport has been assigned to through this very rigorous process. For all of the factors that we have there, airports are being given a score. They're ranked from high to low, sorted into like cohorts, graphed frontwards and backwards, and then all the airports with certain that range in the high, the medium, and low are grouped together, and that's how we put them in a particular role category. But we'll talk about that more, and you'll be able to see the results. Another thing that we're already in the process of doing is evaluating the system. And if you just think about when you were in school and you got a report card and you got a grade, well, I don't even know if they do that anymore. At least they did it when I was in school back in the dark ages. We got a grade in math, and we got a grade in geography. We got a grade in reading, writing, so on and so forth. So what we're doing is now grading the Oklahoma airport system, and it's getting a grade in safety. It's getting a grade in efficiency. It's getting a grade in accessibility. It's getting a grade in economic support, and it's getting a grade in user services. And the way that we're doing that is for each of those performance measures, we've established a series of what we call benchmarks that go with each performance measure. And a benchmark is something that we can actually quantify or evaluate in some way. Some of it's through GIS mapping, others just through the findings of the inventory that we're working on. But through that benchmarking process, we're able to tell, how well the system is performing and give it a grade for each of these categories. In some cases, the system is going to be performing adequately. In others, it's going to be deficient. And as I said, We already know that there are some areas where we do have some redundancy or duplication. So we'll be talking with OIC about what that means, if anything, to the planning process. So this is a very important part of the system plan, and one that really helps us come to our final recommendations. This is the schedule that we're on. The inventory, as I said, actually started back in December. A lot of the inventory is complete, but some of this detailed work that Lochner is doing on RSAs, RPZs, runway taxiway separations, runway and taxiway lighting, all of that probably won't be wrapped up until the June, July timeframe. The forecast chapter has been complete and has been submitted to FAA for their review. We're still waiting to get any comments that they may have back on that. The roles analysis is well underway. And as I said, we anticipate that sometime in May or the early part of June, we'll hold another webinar to talk about the results of that state role assignment process. The system evaluation process, again, another part of the study that's ongoing and well underway. So we expect that that'll be completed probably sometime in July, and that'll be the subject of another webinar. As we start to look at the roles and we start to look at the system evaluation, some of our recommendations become apparent to us right from the onset. And then again, as we start to get the results of all of the evaluation factors that we grade the system in, that really helps us to see where improvements are needed, and those become our recommendations for the system plan. For most of the recommendations that we have, or most of the findings, there will be a cost developed. Some of the benchmarks that we have are really informational. They help OAC to understand how the system is performing in certain areas. I'll give you an example of that. Some of the benchmarks that we have include things like, is the airport attended? Does it have an on-site manager? Does it have flight training? I mean, these are things that OAC can't really influence, but it's good for them to know, because if they see either increases or decreases at a particular airport for some of these factors, it may signal that the airport is either getting healthier or it may be getting weaker and becoming less viable and less sustainable. So some of our benchmarks are informational things that don't really carry a cost with them. They're just things that help OAC monitor how well the system is doing and how the viability is. There will be a number of pieces of documentation that come from this. There'll be a large technical report, which most people won't want to thumb through, and I don't blame you. There'll be an executive summary, which will be probably about a 20-page document that really summarizes all the high points from the technical report. Each airport will get their own summary report from the system plan that tells you or pulls out the highlights for your airport. What does the system plan say about your airport, so that you don't have to go through the whole document to know what the system plan has determined for your individual airport. One of the main pieces of those individual reports will be something that we call an airport report card. And that report card tells you, for your assigned role in the airport system, what facilities and services ideally you should have in place, whether you currently have them or not, and if you don't have them, what action is needed to make you compliant with your objectives, and what the approximate cost would be for you to be 100% compliant with all facility and service objectives. Across the bottom there, as I said, we've got penciled in about 5 of these webinars to keep people up to date on what's going on. The user survey that I mentioned, and I might flip back to that if we're doing any questions, if you didn't write that web address down, or if you didn't want it and you want to participate in the survey, you can reach out to Nick. He can get you the address. Sandra can get it for you. Anybody at OAC has that. It's been publicized through their communications pretty frequently, and it was sent out in some of the initial things. But we're going to leave that survey up for just a couple more weeks. It's already been up for several months, And we're going to be taking that down so that we can roll the results of that survey into our final system evaluation. So if you didn't fill that survey out and you would like to participate, got a couple more weeks, and then that opportunity is going to be gone. So if you want to do that, don't delay anymore. So that's where we are in the schedule. Unless we hit any bumps in the road, which we don't anticipate at this time, we expect that the process will be wrapped up by December. So it's going to be about a 13-month study, start to finish, which is a good pace for an aviation system plan, and one that we like to do them as quickly as we can, because what we find is that where we start in December of 2020, we don't always end up the same. We have airports that change names, we have airports that change contacts, and so on and so forth. So the sooner we can get finished, the beginning matches the end of the report. So we like to do them as quickly as we can. So that's the schedule that we're on. So next steps, things that we're working on now, we're trying to round up, as I mentioned, any missing inventory surveys. So if you're on today and your airport did not fill out a survey, we still would love to have your response and let us know, and we can make sure that we either go through the survey with you, or we can furnish you with the online link again if you don't know where that is. Lochner is out now doing their inventory efforts, especially as they relate to excuse me, verifying RPZ ownership and looking at identifying development properties at some of the system airports. They're out conducting those airport visits. As I said, we're finalizing airport roles. We're continuing to work on the system evaluation, and we are at the point where we want to wrap that stakeholder survey up. So again, if you'd like an opportunity to weigh in on that, please do that in the next couple of weeks. Okay, I missed a slide. So if you'd like to open it up now for any questions that anybody has, we can go back to the slide with the online links if you want to look at those again. Any questions that you might have, we'd be happy to answer. I'm going to throw Nick's contact information up here. I'm sure most of you have that on your speed dial already, but if you don't, and you do have a question at any point through the process, Nick is the one to start with, and then he'll get your question to the appropriate party. So with that, Andrea, I guess you'll have to unmute people or let us know if we've had any questions come in.
And Barb, this is Nick here. I just wanted to let folks know that in the chat box, so if you go to the bottom and hit the chat function, Andrea Post was able to put the 2 links into the chat box. So if you want those can easily be accessed at that location there in the chat function right now. And
Thank you.
If you need to write those down, feel free, but I think you should be able to click them right out of the chat box. And yep, I just confirmed that. So just wanted to start the Q&A with that, but open to any questions anybody has. And thanks again, Barb.
I'll mention a few things here to add on to what Barb said while we let the airport managers and city officials maybe drum up a few questions. This is the time to be thinking long-term and visionary. As you saw some of the forecasting, we are seeing increases in growth potential within general aviation. In some areas, other areas we're seeing decreases. And it's really the confluence of the community. Is the community rising and increasing with their businesses, with their population, with their employment demographics? Those are the airports that we're seeing that are rising and continuing to increase and grow. Obviously, the areas where we're seeing shrinkage is in purely the recreational flying. COVID changed that a little bit. I think everybody was very excited to get back out and experience the love of flying because of COVID when things were shut down. But that's one of the areas that's hurting the most in the GA realm is recreational flying, whereas the business flying realm is really taking off. And so that's going to lead to a kind of a centralization of some of the activity levels in the state at the more economically supported and higher traffic, larger community airports, while we're also seeing some of our smaller rural towns that are increasing in population or increasing in business diversity, seeing some of those positive benefits too. One of the things we're going to be looking at in this particular study is if there's 2 or 3 or 4 airports out there that we'll call them average or fair airports. They may all be unclassified. As you saw from the study, we had 20% of our NPIAS airports are unclassified. That number varies from anywhere, I think a low of 19 airports to a high of 24 or 25 unclassifieds. And that puts Oklahoma right at the top 1, 2, or 3 ranking in the country in terms of states with unclassified airports. If we can figure out a way to maybe get 2 or 3 of those airports put together and combine their resources and combine their aircraft and make one really good airport, that might be something that we look at as part of this study. It's never fun when an airport goes away, but if we can find a way to make a really successful facility for 2, 3, 4 communities, that's going to be an option. It's going to be a potential solution or resolution to our problem. As you heard Barb, our budgets have stayed flat for the better part of the last 20 years, while the construction costs and the cost of doing business have gone up 40, 50, 60% since the year 2000, the last time AIP was raised any significant measure. And that's just required us to do some innovative thinking and required us to make some hard decisions on how do we spend the dollars that we have on a much, much, much reduced budget of what we can purchase with the money we have available. So that's the things I want the airports to be thinking of long term. I want you all to be imagining ways that you can partner together better, work together better as an airport group. I know the Oklahoma Airport Operators Association is trying to do some strategic visioning itself, and I think it's really good that we're doing this simultaneously with the system plan effort. Because this is the time. This is our opportunity, our spotlight to make an impact on aviation aerospace in the state of Oklahoma. It's been never better than it is today within the state of Oklahoma. Aviation aerospace is the hot topic in all circles, political, community, educational, everywhere. It's the hot topic. So we need to take advantage of it today so that we can reap the rewards well into the future. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. Hopefully we have some questions. Please speak up if you have questions or you have some comments. I may even call on 1 or 2 of you. I'm going to open up the participant box here and see if we have any airports, but any questions, please. Paul Priegel, I'm going to have to call on you since you are Mr. President for the OAOA. Anything obviously you're a commercial airport, anything you've experienced or seen here that causes you concern, any questions you might have?
No, I'm excited to see the process. Sorry, I forgot my camera's off. We've already had our visit from Lochner this week. It was painless.
That's good.
Keenan called us and said, hey, can we stop by? And I think he took about 30 minutes of our time, and that involved him actually going out on the airfield and looking at a few things. But no, we've just tried to be as responsive as possible. And I like the thought of it and where it's going. It'll be interesting to see it put all together. Sorry, I didn't have any questions. The presentation was good, so there wasn't a lot left to ask.
That's all right. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. Let's see. Anything else from the rest of the crowd? Anything at all? Let me ask one to Barb. Barb, what's our next presentation going to be going over? What's the milestone that we are expecting to hit and kind of the topics that we're going to cover in that next presentation?
The next presentation, which Grace and I think, we sort of at least internally have penciled in for late May or early June. And for those of you that are on, you can look for an email. If you're an airport manager contact, or else it'll be the next webinar will be advertised in Flybytes also. But the next one will be the airport role assignment. And we'll be talking about the various airport roles, what airports have been assigned to each role, and then also probably be reviewing the major facilities and services that airports in each role should ideally have in place. We won't have gone through the process yet to determine who has what, but we'll be talking about what role, what we looked at in the role assignment process, where your airport ended up in that process, and then what we're going to be using to evaluate the airports in terms of their ability to meet facility and service objectives. And that analysis really forms the basis for many of the system plan recommendations. So we'll talk about the roles and what the role assignments are at that next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
I would imagine that we might get into some of the system evaluation at that time too.
Okay. And I want the airports here, as we talk about the roles, we talked about regional business, district, and community for the better part of the last 2 decades. And as Barb had mentioned in her presentation, we have we're throwing everything out and trying to take the blank slate approach. Obviously, we can't take the true blank slate approach because airports are already there, and we can't really move airports around on a map like you can on a chessboard. But in terms of the role analysis, we may still use some of the existing names. We may use regional business as a name, but the actual role associated with that may be changed. So you may be a regional business today, and you may be a regional business tomorrow under the new system, but that role could be completely different, even though the name's the same. And then vice versa. If maybe you're called a different title, it's not that you've been promoted or demoted, but it's the roles that we're looking at. We may end up on 4, we may end up on 5, we may continue to keep it at 3, but we're trying to take the blank slate approach with the roles environment and really trying to identify what are the different aspects that we have here in the system in Oklahoma. And please pay attention to the roles, but also don't get wrapped around the axle if maybe you're called a different thing than you were previously. It's not a promotion or a demotion. It's going to be a whole new role. And even if you stay the same name, your role could be changed as well.
So that should bait everybody to stay tuned for the next.
Well, I hope so. That's what
Yeah.
I'm trying to do. And I would encourage those airports that are on here today. Thank you for participating. Please visit with your fellow airports and encourage them to attend our next one. We've got I think I saw a maximum of about 26, 27 participants on today's call. If we can get that up to 50 the next go around, that would be really good. Please visit with your fellow airports, encourage them to attend. And we look forward to having you at our next event. Look for the invite and Flybytes and other publications that are coming from Sandra. And if you have questions between now and then, please let us know. Please call Nick. If you don't know something or don't understand something, call Nick. He's your point of contact. All right. Thank you all. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Have a good weekend, everyone. Stay safe.